Okay, so this book came out in October, and I found it surprisingly difficult to write kind of before it was coming out, then while it was coming out, and then after it was coming out. But it's been really amazing to have this community of poets here, and I think having this kind of weekly workshop that we put together has kept me writing, and it's kind of exciting to see that I have a little baby body of work. So I'm reading some very, very fresh poems. They're very much Provincetown poems, and they're new. Sky Barbara. The year we wed, you are always taking off your mask as we exit buildings, leaving a line on each of your cheeks that I want to touch before they fade. After we wed, we flew back to the country of my birth and drove across it, staying along the way in homes of friends and relatives of mine, none of whom had met you, and no home that we stayed in was similar in any way to the last, except for the brand of hand soap, which everyone across 12 states had purchased. Lavender, lemon, verbena. Everything else was changing. My old friends' fortunes were diverging, our road trip like a tour of ways to live, no version of which appealed. My throat was sore for the trip's duration from too much talking, explaining in each state how we had met, a narrative which grew bulky under its own weight by the time we reached Cape Cod, where at dusk I mistook a traffic light for the moon and gasped before I realized my error. Once I'd thought destiny a sort of room that you entered, but sometimes my life really feels like my life. All winter, I've thought almost daily of Sky Barbara, the name bestowed by friends of friends upon their newborn. I watched a viral video of a baby born on call who animates the instant that a blue-gloved finger pushes through the sack. I generated faces of people that didn't exist and found that I already loved them. When I turn off the light just to see I can't read without light and then turn it back on, laughing though I am alone, I know you are coming. The day we wed, Danish strangers called to us from passing bikes outside the courthouse, but we couldn't be sure of what it was they said. The words hung in the blue summer air for a breath and then fled. Cape Cod. The week that I arrived, there was an outbreak, which put us all on edge, and I woke with jagged breath at each night's middle, wailing to my metal box, which pinged my wails across the ocean. The tides filled and emptied the basins twice daily. The sand timer I ordered on the internet arrived on time, and the days passed calendrically. I read the field guide to Cape Cod and tread lightly on the lichen, which I knew my feet were capable of killing. One night, globs of algae washed up, pulsing with their own dim light. I hadn't meant to let in the part of me that hated me, but there it was, hovering over my folded body in the attic that was, for a spell, my home. I flew across the ocean, and when I came back, I could no longer sleep. Something foreign had lodged in me and formed a cord, leeching from me what it needed. A storm came and knocked out power, then another. We all got sick, then recovered. An absence watched me as I lay in bed all day, rubbing my belly where I thought it might be. Then sound at frequencies too high to hear were pulsed into my abdomen, reflecting back a mass that quivered in space with regular rhythm, a beating preceding an actual heart. What is the point of flowers? A child asked his mother last summer while I was bussing tables, lingering over smeary plates to eavesdrop on her answer. The roses, which proffer odd blossoms all winter here in the dunes of the Cape, came as cargo, stashed on a passenger ship, heading to Boston from England, which foundered and wrecked in fair weather on the first day of March, in the middle of a century of revolution, empire, and collapse. Driven ashore, the boat broke apart, discharging its cargo of nutmeg and linens and nursery stock, drowning some dozens, including the captain, who had conspired, it later came out, to sink the ship, doubly insured, worth more sunk than afloat. A man who'd lost all 5 of his daughters pulled the damning letters from a suitcase, then gathered and planted the pear and plum seedlings cast up by the sea, a wrecker's garden. The roses took root all on their own and spread along the Cape's long arm, invasive. The point of flowers, the mother had explained with a surgeon's precision, is to lure in bees, which pollinate the flowers, so the flowers can make more flowers. Yes, the child replied, but what's the point? And I saw the seeds of a nihilism with which I was once well acquainted. When something that grows washes up, what can be done but to plant it? It's foolish, I think, to think that you know what you want. It's special to read these Cape Cod poems here in Provincetown, so thank you for being here tonight and listening. I'll read one more poem. The title is from the new book by David Graeber. I want to give credit because I like the title. We need to think about things a little more radically. For months, I felt I'm not myself, but myself's assistant, toiling on myself's behalf, half here, half nowhere, as I soldier on through emails to myself's relatives and contacts. I email to say yes, no, and thank you. Will write soon, I say, to Lenny, who is pregnant. I write my grandfather to say I peeled and cubed the quinces from the tree in his new wife's ex-husband's home among the redwoods, where he moved at 92 because he was too old to live in Kurdistan anymore in these times. The quince was green and white and looked like a pear, but it wasn't. I'm sorry I'm late to your meeting, I write. I know it's frustrating when you've planned your day around it, have planned your life around the life of meetings. I do not mind all obligations. I like some rigid structures, sometimes being bound, though as a rule I'm bad at follow-through, bad at doing what I say I'll do. I say that I'll read, that I'll stretch, that I'll stop melting my mind before sleep with a screen. I need a self-police, but not police. I need the opposite of police, not someone who grinds me out of my body into the margins. I already do this daily. I scrape the meat of my attention against the grater and tatter, disappear into the ether, into the nether of the internet. The internet thinks I want to have a baby, and I do. It knows that I ordered a bulk pack of sticks that I dip into pee to see what is happening in me because it knows everything. We built it like that, with a godlike omniscience. a panopticon in which we split to be both watched and watcher. The first time I saw the O missing from God, I was 10 and rendered speechless. I had recently received my first failing grade on a test of the 10 Commandments. I was raised to be skeptic by skeptics, but believed in believing. I believed in circles, in the potency of future, in holes between places and times. I know nothing holy and will not. I didn't know where I came from, but knew I would know its pitch and tenor when I heard it, and I hear it. What should I say? There is a part of me that isn't me. What I thought was rain on my roof was the kettle warming. What I thought was a pile of rocks on the far spit of sand was a young whale strangled in a fishing net and starved. What I thought was morning was 20 minutes past noon. The tide was rising, and I was late to my meeting with no one. The humpback whale was gray and white where its skin had come off, which it had, revealing what looked like a sort of foam. I wished to believe that the whale was a prop on a set about human catastrophe, but it wasn't. Or this was the set, and we were all living in it. The stench was very strong. I haven't stricken out the violent metaphors from the language I've inherited. Soldier, police. The body of the whale will take a while to decay. The hard white flesh of quince turned ruby as I boiled it down with sugar into jam. When the self finally appears, don't turn the self away. Thank you. And now I have the great honor of introducing Sterling HolyWhiteMountain. I did not pre-prepare any insults or burns. I don't know what there is to say about Sterling, other than he showed up pretty late for the fellowship. But he fit in pretty quickly, mostly. Sterling HolyWhiteMountain grew up on the Blackfeet Reservation. He holds an MFA from the Iowa Writers' Workshop, has been awarded the James C. McCreight Fiction Fellowship at the University of Wisconsin, the Stegner Fellowship, and a Jones Lectureship at Stanford University, and is currently a fellow here at the Fine Arts Work Center in Provincetown, Massachusetts. His work has appeared in The New Yorker twice. That's my addition, not his bio, just to clarify, unlike Sterling clarified with my bio. As well as the Paris Review, The Atlantic, ESPN.com, interesting, Montana Quarterly, and the Yellow Medicine Review. He is an unrecognized citizen of the Blackfeet Nation. Please welcome Sterling.
I really like that ESPN piece, Tracy. I resent, well, I resent you generally, but, you know, I resent that remark. Let's see, a couple things. I was going to wear this really cool hoodie that had paint kind of splashed on it, and I was going to do it specifically for the purpose of bringing out Ellen's sort of, you know, innate condescension about my painting capacity. And also to make Kevin jealous, because, you know, then he would have known what a real painter looks like. Let's see. I'm going to I'm really glad that there's no like, what's that thing that they used to do with the cane to pull people off stage? The hook. I'm gonna start. Okay. And as always, I'm apologizing to my mother for pretty much everything. So I'm gonna read the beginning of a book, which some of my fellows here insist is a novella, but it is not. It is a short novel, which. But I have to explain something first, because otherwise it's not really going to make sense. So as probably most of you know, most of the treaties that the U.S. signed with with the indigenous nations of this continent were, broken in various ways at different points. And our last treaty, which was 18, I don't remember. It's in the Provincetown Independent article from when I knew it a week ago. In 1868, I think. That last treaty that we signed was signed but not ratified. And so, and then of course, and that was about, I think, almost nearly over a third of the state of what we now call Montana. And so we weren't paid for it, and that was that, and it was settled by Americans. And then in the 1960s, Congress set up this thing called Indian Claims Court, and allowed tribes to sue the U.S. government for various types of claims. And so what we did is we sued for what we generally refer to as the Sweetgrass Hills Treaty, and we were, of course, the thing that goes along with filing a claim like that with the U.S. government, and there's always which is that they paid us for it, but then they're like, well, you can never bring this up as the Lakota in South Dakota. That's why you will see occasionally it come up in the news that that like the Black Hills are still, that the X amount of money is owed to the Lakota Hills, because they actually chose not to sue for it, because they said that land is still ours. What happened as a result of the claims that were filed is that tribes were, paid out certain amounts of money, and tribes could do whatever they wanted with the money. And what we did was pay out a certain amount. Was born everybody that was an enrolled member at that time in 1962, and everybody that was born after that up until 1980 or 81, and so people get, and everybody was always about it, but I had no idea. It was never really explained to most people, and most people I know, I just know there was a claim check, but they don't really know where the money came from. I spent years talking to people trying to figure out why, like where this, like, I'm like, what was the claim, and eventually I sort of pieced things together, because really, it's extremely complicated, and it's also not taught. So if you want to know stuff like that, you either have to go back to school and go into debt, like I did, or and you also spend a lot of time talking to older people on your reservation, because and eventually you can kind of piece things together. So the thing that underpins this, all these kids getting claimed when they turn 18. I think that's it. This first section is the money, which is a title section, and the second section, which you won't hear anything from, is called the drinking, which is also a section title, and the third section, I don't know what it's called. That's about my book. That summer was the summer I got the only claim check of my life, and along with many others who got the same, spent my own small piece of the Sweetgrass Hills, and that is the sort of thing you can't forget once you've done it and know what it is. That was the summer my Uncle Con, stone sober and believing wholly in the power of Christ, since at least 72, told me stories, some of them the old stories, the ones first spoken in a language neither one of us knew in any real way, but nonetheless had a respect and for it that likely exceeded every other form. And that was the Lori Johnson, who had one of the loudest voices I have ever heard, the kind of voice that calls to you at strange past. Caesar Bad Strike, fucking Alana Morris in his truck well after midnight, right across the street from Laurie's house. Oh, his truck was just ringing. You could hear you could hear the shocks squeaking. That was how she said it. Her eyes just big like saucers. Her voice even louder than usual when she would tell the story later on to any poor fucker who would listen. And the way she told it, oh, she pretended it was an awful story. Her best friend's man cheating like that with Alana, who everybody knew, opened her legs for effort or got her drunk, both. The burden of it all. It was a tremendous weight, but there is always some survivor with bringing to the people the story of what happened in the battle. Somehow, though, in a town whose feeds on the blood of us knew on with Alana since the previous winter, when June had gone home early, quick, from the New Year's Eve party Lisa Last Dog held at her house. The two of them, Caesar and Alana, walked out the door in that way you do when you're going somewhere with someone to fuck. I had the sudden every single thing meant something watching them go out that door hand in hand, but that the meaning was always behind us, and that we would not that way and die like that, a bunch of stupid fuckers. It was a big thought for a man of 17, so I went to the kitchen and took another shot of Fireball, and soon enough it began to spread itself out like the most tremendous deflated balloon. There was not a woman or a young woman yet, but still mostly a girl. There was her that made men, older men. I noticed them when we were still almost kids. I saw them turn their heads toward her, and at first this made me feel strange. I couldn't understand what I was feeling, but I had the sense that the sense of something large approaching, like one of those dreams with a looming presence, but the thing that casts the shadow never appears. She looked at her, and the more they looked, changed. She went through the jewels of their eyes, and what she was on the side was something new. And later, when we were older, I wanted her to change for me the way she changed for who approached her and fell away like cannon fodder. Even still for the older men, though for them she changed something almost mean to them. She batted them around and told me stories about them, stories about laughing at them, even making some of them cry, which made her feel disgusted, watching them fucking bitches, which was how she said it. But when she told me about them, she would laugh with deep amusement in that way someone does, care about the thing they are amused like I wasn't there, but of course she would not have long or as hard if I weren't. Oh, the title of the book is the I knew I forgot something. The title of the book is the Education of Little Man False Star Boy. And then there was the other June, the second June, the narrator's Little Man. Then there was the other June, the one we joked around with and had been drunk as fuck with many times since that first time we stayed out to the pavilion, me and June and a few others, one of them Josh Big Bear, who I have not seen since he was sent away a few for fucking this white girl in Blood Creek whose parents had found out and had him tried for statutory even though their daughter had not wanted it. I'm drunk out behind the pavilion, stumbling around and laughing in the shadow of that tremendous steel-sided building which had not been used since we were born. Its huge doors pulled permanently open, gaping like a black doorway into me and June standing in a kind of proscenium whose boundary was marked by light, taking turns shouting into the depths of the unlit building's massiveness, sharp slats of light breaking through in the places where sections of steel siding had been ripped from the frame by the wind. Christian brothers, found half full out in a field that afternoon, passed back and forth between us like a sacrament, our voices booming back to us from the far, dark end of the empty calling. This was the same June who got her first expulsion our freshman year, fighting Dale Hawk in math ball, leaving skinny-ass Dale to spend the rest of his life thinking about what she us to tease him about it. And then later expelled again junior year for beating the holy hell out of Marissa Holter for trying to tease her, who had been with June since her 8th grade year when he was already 17 and a junior champion bull rider, whose name was beginning to mean something in the rodeo circles of. And this was the same June who, during our senior year, wore a perfume that gave you a sense of being enshrouded in a dark warmth, of being caught in a heavy, languid summer night that wrapped itself around you and left you half asleep and endangered. The check had been an idea long that when it came time for me, when I turned 18 near the end of our senior year, I tried to do anything at all. At that time, talk of claim check money was people about being claim check rich and then later laughed about being claim check broke. People bought claim check cars, got claim check drunk, a few even married. A sedan in need of a wash, trailing Rainier cans held by a string tied around the bumper, those big words drawn loopingly across the tinted back window. On my birthday, I asked Big Man how I was supposed to get the money. He said, I don't know. Maybe I already spent it. I really remember. He knew that I knew he had not spent it, but he wanted to. When he said it, so I gave him the face and he laughed at me. He had already got the check because the woman who ran the finance office, I cannot remember her name. I think she was a son. She was a big friendly woman who was always flirting with Big Man, which I could never understand. An old man who had raised me and had been generous with me and taught me to be respectful and had a few times raised his voice when I was not, moments which I can still remember. But now that he has been gone for many years, my grandpa had been a man who carried himself with dignity and had conducted himself in relation to others, whether or otherwise, with a supreme sort of confidence that bordered on ignorance. He did not care what you thought about his life or what he did with it, and often enough he did not care what you did with your own. Unless you were fucking, he would finally lose patience with your dumbassery, offer a few choice words you never forget that would resurrect themselves in your head off and on for the remainder of your life, regardless of what you wanted. True things always do. And in that in his life, teasing the women in the offices, and I saw them and how they looked at him when he did, and their faces without affection or something. He was profoundly in ways that I cannot say he understood or even that I understand. At him and see that he was a way only Blackfeet have ever been, without quite knowing we are that way. Who had spent the entirety of their life in France would be profoundly in ways they could not identify or say. And when I finally lost him, I knew that some piece of myself, I take it for granted, had not even been able to see. It was so essential to how I thought of myself, had fragmented and been tossed into the great emptiness around us, and that it would be forever less than I had been. But later I came to see that you could not finally be a real person without such loss, and that any attempt to remain whole was not just futile, but the true and endless motion of life, which is endless among the shining temporaries of this world. After he had handed me the check, I stared at it. I didn't know what I should do with it. I must have looked like a stupid kid. It was likely why he laughed. I asked him how he got it. All he said was, "See how lucky you are, it was me who..." Then it was a few days later, so I just realized I cut something out, so I'm going to explain what I just read. So if you're born like after 62, obviously like you're too given money, and so what they would do is give the money to your guardian, and they could do whatever they wanted with it. And some people, in some cases, they just spent their own kids' money. In other cases, they would put it in, they would put it in the bank for them. So in this case, Big Man put the money in the bank for Little Man. Then it was a few days later, and me and June and Big Man were driving to Silver Falls, to the strip where the dealerships were, the long lines of shining hoods and unflawed windshields, flags even bigger. I asked for June to come with me before, when she had got her own check and had taken her own trip to Silver Falls. We went into the big lots with their narrow tracks running between the shining rows of chrome, and we cruised up and down them and looped through others and then went on to the next dealership. And we did not stop until I had made up my mind about really looking at a rig or two. Big Man would not stop anywhere until I'd seen something I really wanted. They had a tag that was somewhat close to what I could afford, and that led us to going through some of the lots twice. June was sitting between us, and when she got irritated, she said, "Why weren't we getting out to look at any?" Man said he wasn't going to waste his day looking at 50 goddamn cars. "We'll stop when little man knows," he said. Eventually, on our way through Jerry's used beauties, I saw a black Bronco with an orange and yellow stripe down the side, and I decided I wanted to see what it was all about. Big man to a spot at the empty end of the small parking lot and let us out. Sat in the truck, waiting and smoking. His windows rolled down a bit, and he had parked so the wind coming out of the west hit the passenger side of the truck. Sitting there in his brush jacket and his king ropes hat and his darkened glasses, the cigarette in his left hand, elbow resting on the door frame so his hand was near the opening so the smoke would go that way. The plane's wind hit the truck and everything else within 100 miles so hard that you could not help but feel as if there was something about the wind that hated you, and whatever that was wanted nothing but misery for you and your kin. Anybody who's been on the Northern Plains knows what I'm talking about. If you haven't been, then you don't. On the way to the Bronco, we passed this cherry red Mustang convertible that seemed to catch all the light of the world, and I cannot help but stop and look at it and put my hands on it and run my fingers over the driver's side fender. And I did all these things in an unthinking manner. I just knew I was supposed to touch it. June said if I was going to touch it like that, I better just get nasty with it and stop wasting her time. And she laughed, and so did I. A salesman showed up the way they do, seeming to have risen from a lesser ring of hell itself, all over big smiles and ringed fingers and strong handshakes. He had curly brown hair and a mustache and a round freckled face, and he could not have been more than a few years older than me, but there was a way in which he conducted himself. It was in his hand gestures and the way he stood very straight-backed and used his voice strong and clear and with force, and everything about him suggested supreme authority over all things. And because of the way he talked to me, immediately I hated him and wanted to hurt him badly in some way. He had seen me looking at the Mustang with its somewhat dirtied white drop top and had said we should go look at some of the cars at the far side of the lot. He used his hands like I had seen a field general do on TV. But instead I said, I don't know. I kind of like this one. It's kind of sinuous and marauding, you know. I smiled at him. I had never spoken like this to anyone in my life, and doing so made me feel larger than myself. And I understood something about the salesman and his bad clothes, but the difference between us was that for me it was the inside of me and for him it was the outside. He paused and looked at me. I could see that there was something small and weak behind his mustache and his brown slacks and his slightly wrinkled pink shirt with its sleeves rolled up his hairy arms, and I knew he had never been in a fight in his life, or had not won a fight, or at least not had his ass beat so badly that he didn't care anymore about being hurt. And when I saw this, he stopped being real to me for some reason, and I felt relaxed and careless about him and did not feel any need to prove myself. That's true, he said. That one is a beauty, but I think there are some models over here that are probably more affordable. How do you know how much money he's got? June said. Fuck, maybe he could buy 2 of these. The salesman did not say anything. Okay, then, I said, maybe we will go look at those other models you were talking about. And anyway, it was fine that I could not afford the Mustang. Within 10 minutes or maybe 10 hours, I would have totaled that car at 120 and been thrown 30 feet through or over the windshield, feeling the amazing revelation of true human flight just before I landed and got my hide scraped off, and my face looked like one of those gibbering hamburger faces you see in horror films. We crossed the parking lot, and on the way over, June said that I sure knew some big words and that maybe all those books I had read had actually done something besides make me a big nerd. And I thought, well, maybe that was true. We ended up at the Bronco. Up close, it was a slick, boxy black thing with the tinted windows and had been pretty well taken care of by whoever had owned it. And I was somewhat in love at first sight with the broad orange and yellow stripe that ran down the length of the driver's side. But it was a piece of trash, too, as Con pointed out to me later. But as with all things, the truth came so late as to not only be worthless, but perhaps even more damaging than the prior ignorance. The salesman told me to take it for a drive, and I drove it for a few blocks of Silver Falls, down past SFH with everybody getting out of school and walking down the sidewalks with their backpacks and white boy haircuts and white girl makeup, which was not all that different from the haircuts and makeup I was used to seeing back in the floor, but it was also very different. There was a neatness, something contained or shiny or soft about them that stood out to me whenever I had gone to places like Silver Falls in my life. But I had no thoughts about this fact, only the fact itself, There were a few Indian kids among them, and as we passed them, I could tell that June was really watching. Eventually she said, "I wonder if those guys even know they're Indian." I laughed. No, really though, she said. Do they even know, or are they like one of those dogs that grew up with cats? Do they just think they're cats? Fuck, I don't even care, I said. Ooh, she said. Got a claim check, and you're just tough all of a sudden. I drove the Bronco back, and I was good to go, and said I was good to go, and what was next? June was laughing at me by that time. I guess I had never looked however it was I looked. I must have looked like a real rich or at least fancy guy or something. When June had been down to Silver Falls to set up her own bank account and withdrawn her own money and had bought her own car, I had gone with her so as to get a feel for things, and because Caesar had been off to a spring rodeo and was likely carousing with some blonde white girl who had been riding horses since her daddy first put her on a thoroughbred and trotted her around the ranch that had been in their family since his great-great-grandfather had first squatted on that land and claimed it as his own when there was nothing but the sound of his own voice to set against the great silence of the plains to prove that claim to the land. And it was not even a state yet. It was an idea on a piece of paper in Washington. It was a handful of men in suits deciding the world. And meanwhile, there was my own great-great-great-grandfather and maybe his best bro watching on while that white guy laid claim to things that were not and would never be his, no matter how it was argued. On that trip, June had set up her own account, had then withdrawn some of her own money, which was the day after her birthday, and we had gone around Silver Falls until we found the one she wanted. An orange Camaro with flames on the driver's side, and these fat tires on the back, and the windows had blue-silver tint on them that was peeling at some of the edges, but it was okay, and the black leather gear shift was worn, smooth, and gray, and frayed at the stitched seams. Before we pulled out of the lot, she had done this thing that up to then I could not remember seeing, and it made a great impression on me. She had opened her backpack and said, "Check this out." How am I doing? Been reading for 45 minutes yet? This is just the beginning. I have another 45 minutes after that, just so you know. Oh, I forgot. I was going to tell you another story at the start. I did a reading in Tucson, I can't even remember, 5, 6, 7 years ago, and I read a very, very early version of this, and there was this old lady that was in there, and it was very hot. It was like 95, 100 degrees in the middle of summer in Tucson, and I started reading this, and I had only made it through one page, and she got up and she walked out, and my cousin was sitting outside because it was just too hot. He was listening outside, and he's like, afterward, he's like, "Man, it's like that old white lady. When she left, she walked past us and she said, 'Literature is dead.'" So, I mean, all of you may have done amazing things in your life, but none of you killed literature. That was me. Anyway, let's see. She had opened her backpack and said, "Check this out." And she had taken a purple T-shirt from within and unfolded it and removed this surprising and profound and extraordinary thing from its place in the shirt, and using the leather string run through its stem, she had hung it from the rear view, and then there it was, hanging in front of both of us. At that point in my life, I had seen many things hung from a rear view, or crucifixes, or rosaries, or fuzzy dice from the county fair, or air fresheners, and sometimes a combination of several, or maybe all at once. And though it had certainly been done before, I had no memory of such a thing. And as a result, the sight of an eagle feather hanging from a rear view was really a thing to behold. Its stem beaded in the colors of LHS, red and black, its tip brushing the dash as the car rocked as we pulled out of the lot, and it would swing further out to one side or the other depending on which way she was turning, but always it was brushing the dash as it did so. The feather had been beaded and given to her early for our coming graduation by her auntie, who was always beading anything she could get her hands on. These days, a feather hung from a mirror is a common thing, but at that time it struck me as having a particularly large meaning, though I could not have said what, and though even now I am not sure what to say about it, I know it is a good thing. But what I had said when she first hung that feather was, "Holy fuck, you got catty. When did you get so catty?" That's Blackfeet slang. You don't understand it. Don't worry about it. And she had and she had just smiled at me and nodded toward the feather and said, one hand on the worn black steering wheel, "Look, this car is sacred now." We both laughed. Thank you.
So what an enormous privilege to sit in this room together and hear new work and work in development and kind of all of the beauty and vulnerability of that. Please join me in giving a huge round of applause to Tracy and to Sterling. I hope you'll all join us for the next in our free public programming series, and you'll check our website for upcoming events. Enjoy your evening, everyone. Thank you.